It is a joy and a privilege to be with you this morning as we gather to worship the Christ who calls us to follow him in our lives on a daily basis and calls us this day to his table to be fed and nourished so that we can be sent out renewed and encouraged. I brought with me today what is technically called a crozier, simply known as a bishop's staff, that was crafted by a member of the parish I served in before I took this call. It's in the back. It's a reminder and a symbol of the office of the bishop as shepherd of the people of this synod, all 165 congregations. And I've been taking it with me over the years and greeting people at exit spaces of worship and inviting them, as I will invite you, as I did last evening's group, to simply place your hands on it or touch it and let you know that I will take you with me next week when I am in Zion, Geneva, to preach and be with them. Last week I was in Bethany in Central Bridge. I'll ask the question I asked last night. How many of you have been to Central Bridge or even know where it is? Any guesses? Schoharie County? Anybody know where Schoharie County is? Yeah, it's in the southern tier. It is about 10 miles west of the Cobleskill area on Route 86, I think, the Southern Tier Expressway. Those brothers and sisters in Christ came with me today, and next week I take you with me to the next place I go as well as others. So if you're so inclined, please feel free to put your hand on it or grab it or touch it. If you're not inclined, no harm, no foul. Some people do and some people don't. But it reminds me when I see it to also pray for all of those who have touched it, as well as those who have not, as I pray for the people of God across this church. So I'll see you on the way out, and the choice is up to you. I don't know about you, but I was never the kid who was heavily invested or involved in sports in my life, as folks are today. I didn't have parents who pushed me in that direction. Having said that, I thought I would give sports a chance in my young life. So I tried out for Little League, and I didn't make the Little League team. I played baseball in grade school in 8th grade for 1 year and actually got on the field for half of an inning when the coach sent me out to left field where nobody ever hit baseballs. Basketball found me trying out for the team at Emmanuel Lutheran Church in Bristol, Connecticut. And I almost made the team. I was the last person cut from the team, which gained me the position of statistician, which was a very important role to play for the coach, except when you made mistakes on assists and who made the baskets and things like that. It was not a fun job. And it was at that point, I believe, that I gave up any notion that I had any gifts or talents to be involved in sports. It simply was not my thing. What I did, however, do pretty well in those early days and on through college years was sing. I can still recall standing in the balcony of Emmanuel Lutheran Church, the downtown mother church in Bristol, Connecticut, in a balcony that was a horseshoe-shaped balcony in a massive nave, singing a single verse during a Christmas pageant of We Three Kings. Children's choir was a mainstay of mine. My dad was a pastor in the Missouri Synod, so I sang in church quite frequently. And high school offered me opportunities to sing in chorus, in special chorus, and in a madrigal group that went to state competitions. I occasionally offered solos in church and at other places as well. Having said all of that, I tried to put a stop to my singing and my involvement in it in high school, the year that was my senior year, when the musical for that spring was a musical that you all know, some of you by heart, called The Sound of Music. It's been around for a long time, and it's a popular play for high schools to put on. I had no theatrical experience and self-admittedly gifts for the theater and for the stage. I had no desire to stand on stage in front of, in that space, about 500 critics who were looking at you and listening to your every word and every note and your voice. So when that play went up, I decided I was not going to audition for it. But I also had about a half dozen friends who hounded me to sign up for tryouts. They were relentless. So right before the tryouts were to go on, I think it was the second or last day, I put my name on the sign-up sheet just to placate them, and I walked away. You can imagine my surprise when the casting list was posted. And I had not only made the casting list, but my name was behind the character in the play that you may be familiar with called Captain Georg von Trapp. I had simply on my voice and no theatrical skills been assigned this role. I was stunned and wondered what I had done to myself and to others who had to put up with me on the stage. The short story is that when all was said and done, and after a rocky opening night for me when I dropped the lyrics of one line of one of the songs, the show ran for 5 nights to sold-out houses and was very well received despite a scathing commentary about my gifts on that opening night in the local paper, the Bristol Press. I was invited at that time in my life to do something that I had no desire to do, nor did I feel I had the talents to offer in that space and time. Evidently, looking back on that, I was somewhat wrong. In a similar nature, if you stretch the analogy a little bit, to Luke's gospel today, when Jesus is seeking some space from the pressing crowds, someone else is asked to do something that he does not want to do. Jesus is on the shore speaking to the people, and a crowd is now pressing in on him, apparently beginning to move him towards water's edge. So he steps into one of the boats, turns out to be Simon Peter's boat, and Jesus asks him to push off from shore just a little bit so he has some distance and can speak to the crowd that stands on the shore. So Peter does. And when Jesus is done, he turns to Peter, who is in the boat, and says to him, I want you to take your boat and go out into the deep and go fishing. Peter resists. Luke tells us, he said to him, Master, we have worked all night, but we have caught nothing, not a single fish. But if you say so, I will let down the nets. Peter as much as told Jesus that he did not want to do that. He had spent the whole night out there. They hadn't caught a single fish, but if it's important to you, I'll do it. So they went out to the deep, they cast their nets and filled them with so many fish that they began to break, forcing them to call the other boat to come in and help them gather the fish, which put 2 boats in jeopardy as both began to sink due to the weight of the fish. And as if that was not enough and astounding for Peter and James and John and the others, when they got back to shore, Jesus basically said to them, leave the fish here, let go of your livelihood, and come and follow me. They left everything that they had and that they knew. They left their boats, they left their nets, they left their friends, they left their family, they left their livelihood, and headed off into a future they had no clue about to follow Jesus. They didn't know where they were going or what they were doing beyond Jesus' reference to catching people and whatever that meant. And it wouldn't be off base to ask the question, what were they thinking in giving up all of that? I mean, really, would you have done the same if you were Peter or James or John or one of those other fishermen in the boat at that moment, not from this side of history, but standing next to them on their side of history? Have you ever been asked to do something that you feel is so far out of your wheelhouse, it would be ridiculous to even give it a second thought? Think about that for a moment. What have you been asked to do in life or in the life of the church that you've been stunned anybody would consider you for? Here's a word of caution to you this morning as we encounter this gospel and this Christ. Listen carefully. Sometimes when Jesus calls and you follow, life can change and strange things can begin to happen. So be careful, because Jesus is calling you and me today, and you never know what might happen or what you might end up doing or where you might be. Here's the catch. The context in which we live and move is not as dramatic as Peter and his fellow fishermen's context. We don't actually see Jesus face to face. He's not going to walk up to you this morning after worship and say, listen, I want you to push your boats out into the deep and catch fish for me. But Jesus still calls us nonetheless, and we are expected to answer. And when you do, watch out for what you've signed up for. You could find yourself offering to fill a position on church council, or work with young people, even if you've never done it before. Maybe you might increase your pledge in the middle of the year for no apparent reason. Perhaps you'll volunteer for something you've never heard of before, or give your time in places and to people that you never imagined you would interact with. You've got to be careful, because with this Jesus and his calling, you never know where it's going to take you. He'll call you out to follow, and it is entirely possible that you will feel totally unequipped to do what he asks. But know this, if you follow Jesus, it can change your life forever. Maybe not suddenly and instantly, but it will change your life. You might begin praying for your enemies. Prayerfully consider raising your contributions to church and other places, bringing food for the hungry, volunteering to sing in the choir, work on behalf of immigrants in this country. You could find yourself being compassionate or generous, or God forbid, even more forgiving of those with whom you don't even think they deserve forgiveness. Peter and his gang gave up everything that they had, their livelihood, their families, their way of life, their support, and they simply followed. Think back for a moment on earlier folks in history who went through similar sorts of realities. Moses tries to talk his way out of following the voice that's coming to him through a burning bush, claiming he stutters and has no ability to speak or leadership qualities or whatever. And he finally left and began doing and carrying out a journey he never could have possibly imagined. And you know where that journey took him. There was a young boy named David in the Old Testament, called out to face Goliath, and answering the call, he killed him with a single stone from his sling. Later, as the youngest son, he was set apart to be king of Israel and lead God's people. Or maybe, you'll remember Sarah, well beyond childbearing years. She had a husband named Abraham, who was as good as dead, according to Scripture. She gave birth and began a family lineage as numerous as the stars in the sky. There was a young woman named Mary, who listened to an angel and the call of God to be the God-bearer. And with little hesitation, she submitted to the will of God and bore God's only begotten Son, bringing the world and us hope and wonder and salvation. You get the point, I think. God calls you to use your gifts and talents in ministry to the world, and you can ignore it for a while, to be sure. But, and listen carefully, if you don't ignore it, can't block it out of your ears or turn it off, it has a strong possibility of changing everything in your life. You might leave your boat behind. You may be called to do what you feel is impossible. It might cause you to think about doing something that you honestly don't believe you have the gifts for. The list is limitless, people of God. But the bottom line is this. when Jesus calls and you follow, you don't go alone. He who calls you will accompany you on a journey and will give you the gifts necessary for each step of the way. Today's gospel is a call to not only listen, but also to step out boldly and confidently, to follow, to believe that the one who calls you is faithful. It is a call to let your light shine, so that others might see God in you and the power that God gives. So be careful, listen carefully, and enjoy the journey. Just be certain that you know in your heart of hearts that things can change quite suddenly, and you might find yourself surprised at where you end up and what you are doing. Because as the Spirit continues its work in you, you just never know what might happen. Amen.